Hey there everyone, welcome back to Utility Sports. Extremely excited to talk about my favorite team in this video, the Dallas Mavericks, who just unfortunately lost in the NBA Finals in 5 games to the Boston Celtics. Credit to the Boston Celtics, the better team, a very well-built team. Credit to Brad Stevens. So in this video, I wanted to talk about the Dallas Mavericks and their plans for this offseason. Now, if you've been following the channel, you know I've been recording offseason previews for a bunch of different teams. This is not just a flat-out offseason preview. This is specifically centered around potential Dallas Mavericks trades this offseason, giving an overlook at a potential trade guide for the Mavericks. I hope you guys do enjoy, especially Mavs fans out there. Let's hopefully enjoy this video. Again, if you are new, make sure to leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more content. And let's jump into a video preview here. What are we going to look to address in this video? First of all, the Mavs internal offseason is pretty straightforward. That is the reason I'm not going to record an offseason preview, at least at this point in time, what I'm planning on doing. The Mavericks don't have cap space this offseason. The most likely thing they do internally is retain Derrick Jones Jr. on a bigger contract than he played for this past season, which was the minimum. So the Mavs offseason is going to be pretty bland from a free agency standpoint. They only have pick number 58 in the draft, so I don't really expect them to be super active in the early stages of the draft or in free agency. But what I do think that they will do is be very aggressive hunting upgrades through the trade market, which is the entire point of this video. We're going to look at the Mavs trade assets. We're going to evaluate who's valuable, who's not. We're also going to look at some of the tradable contracts that they have. How would they include those into deals? We'll talk about some potential frameworks for trades as well. Again, in this video, I'm not saying that these are the agreed upon deals. I'm saying that this is maybe the starting point of negotiation for a lot of these trades, and we'll look at some of those potential trade targets as well. Not only who does Dallas have to give up, but who would they look to go get, and how do those players fit into the mold of a team that was super close to getting over the hump and winning a championship with Luka Doncic. Unfortunately, the team was just not talented enough. The role players completely vanished, especially in the finals. Some of them disappeared in the Western Conference Finals even. We'll talk about some of the things that they need to address, and it really comes down to a lot of my philosophy on dribble, pass, shoot. They just need better players, and I know that sounds super simple. It's hard to accomplish, and that's something Dallas, I think, has failed to consistently do. Finding well-rounded players, not just players who fit Luka Doncic, but players who can dribble, pass, and shoot, and really put pressure on defenses. Having to guard them in the Boston series, we saw the Celtics completely disrespecting most of, if not all of, the Dallas Mavericks role players. So how do they go about addressing that? We'll talk about that right now. Some of the trade assets that they do have: they have a 2025 first-round pick, which becomes trade eligible on draft night. They have a 2031 first-round pick as well, which becomes tradable on draft night. So this is not new or unique to the Dallas Mavericks. This is the scenario that is true for all 30 NBA teams regarding that 2030 first-rounder. So if you're a Mavs fan counting on having 2 tradable first-round picks, one thing I'm going to say is most teams do have at least 2 tradable first-round picks. This is not a lot of leverage, having those 2 picks, because a lot of GMs don't have 7 years of job security. Maybe someone like Sam Presti does, and a few others around the league. They're going to have that long-term job security to be worth trading for a 2031 first-round pick. But some GMs, some executives are on the hot seat. They can't afford to wait around 7 years for a draft asset. So that 2031 first, even though I think it could be very valuable down the road, in trade negotiations, it will not be held in high regard just because of how far out that draft asset is. You also have 2 young guys. Max Prosper spent a lot of the year with the Texas Legends. I think just not ready for real NBA minutes in his rookie season, which is why we didn't see him very much. But what he is a very hyper athletic wing, someone who can really excel in advantage situations, which when you're playing alongside Luka Doncic, you're going to get a lot of those opportunities. He's a blur in transition, moves his body extremely well, has a ton of defensive upside. I still think something Dallas looks at with a lot of value here in Max Prosper. He is someone who other teams would have interest in. The Mavericks don't want to just give him up for nothing. You're going to notice I don't have Derek Lively on the screen. I think he is untouchable going into this offseason. And then Jaden Hardy, someone else who, listen, he got a lot of run in the Western Conference Finals. He got some run in the NBA Finals. I think played relatively well this postseason. He's not a premium trade asset, but he is someone who around the league could hold some value and hold some weight in trade negotiations to at least say, hey, this kid would be worth acquiring or would be an interesting pickup for a team. I don't have him in a bunch of trades in this video. I do think he is someone Dallas would like to keep, but if the push comes to shove, maybe a team would be able to swindle one of Max Prosper or Jaden Hardy away in a deal. Dallas obviously is looking long-term at their future and valuing some of these young guys like Lively, Max Prosper, and Jaden Hardy a ton as fitting Luka Doncic's age range. But at the same time, they're also trying to push their chips in to win. They've traded a ton of their own draft picks out the door, obviously. So they don't have a lot of flexibility in terms of what other assets they have to trade. So if a team is willing to do business with you, but they're requiring one of or both of Hardy and Max Prosper, it would be an interesting sticking point where Dallas probably doesn't want to do it. But depending on the player, maybe they would have to budge. Tradable contracts. So these are players who I don't think have a ton of value around the league, but I do think could be included to match salaries. Now, they are different quality players here. There are varying levels of quality. Some of these players in a vacuum do hold some value. We'll talk about that as we go through the list. Tim Hardaway Jr. is going into an expiring year, final year of his contract, $16.1 million. I will be completely shocked if Tim Hardaway Jr. is on the team by next March of 2025. If he survives this offseason in Dallas, he certainly will not survive past the trade deadline next year. I would be very, very surprised if Tim Hardaway Jr. is on the roster 12 months from now. Maxi Kleber, 2 years left on his deal, $11 million this next season. A very tradable contract. He has dealt with some injuries, but teams around the league, when they've seen what he's been able to do in the playoffs, there would be some interest in acquiring him. It's not like he's a flat salary dump like Tim Hardaway Jr. likely would be in a lot of the trades we'll talk about today. Maxi Kleber is still a valuable player. He can guard across multiple positions, can match up with wings, can move his feet, has played some center as well. I think we're starting to see some diminished results with him playing center on the defensive end of the floor when it comes to his rim protection. But Kleber obviously can step out and shoot. He was dealing with a shoulder injury, just didn't really look himself for most of this postseason, but still a quality player and someone that when you have him in a deal, he's not just a throw-in, so that's something worth considering. Josh Green, not another throw-in either. He actually had a very good Game 5 of the NBA Finals. Really impressive in that one, although his role and his production has been really inconsistent early in his career. Now, I still think Josh Green could blossom into a quality player, someone who gives you a reliable 15 to 25 minutes a night, depending on what team and what role you're asking him to do. He has some real tertiary playmaking skills. I don't think you can rely on him as a primary or secondary creator, but he can be a unique play creator as a cutter, as a driver of the basketball. There's moments where his passing vision really does shine. Obviously, the shot's been a big problem for him throughout his early NBA career, but he's hyper athletic, can really move his feet well in transition and on the defensive end of the floor. And again, that playmaking feel, that passing vision is kind of one of his bigger swing upside skills that if you really are able to harness it, get rid of some of those wild passes he throws and just really turn him into a quality playmaker, he could be a really good get for another team. And he's not someone Dallas just wants to get rid of either. Again, he fits that Luka Doncic age range, but when it comes to making deals, you might have to give something up you don't want to. Josh Green, I could see being in that category. Dwight Powell, 2 years left. The final year is a player option. He will definitely pick that player option up. He's making $4 million a year. I did not include Dwight Powell in any trades because I don't think the Mavericks will trade him. I think they value him a lot as a locker room guy. I think organizationally, they like having him around, and if they're able to work out a way to get trades done without having to include his salary, I expect Dallas to operate in that way. I don't agree with it. I don't think that's the way that they should operate, but I do expect that to be the case. AJ Lawson, he's got 3 years left on his contract. It's fully non-guaranteed, but the Mavericks could look to attach his $2 million contract in instead. So this is kind of what I'm talking about with excluding Powell from deals. Maybe they would look to rather just throw in AJ Lawson's contract instead. It gives the other team some flexibility. It's a very cheap contract, and if they need an extra $1 million or $2 million to go into a trade to get it to financially work, AJ Lawson could be that sticking point in a deal to get the financials in the correct place for a trade to actually go down with the NBA CBA rules. So now let's talk about potential trade number one, and I'm extremely excited about this one. And it kind of pays homage to the trade for Spencer Dinwiddie back in 2022 when the Mavericks, with Luka Doncic and Jalen Brunson already on the roster, brought in a third guard, and they kind of just exploded offensively, having that third ball handler, third guy who could create off the dribble. It did wonders for their offense, and this is something we saw this postseason, where having only 2 ball handlers, only 2 playmakers, 2 creators, is a flawed system and something that just flat out does not work, especially the deeper you get into the playoffs. It really puts a lot of pressure on your number 1 and number 2 guy to be perfect every single night. At times, Luka and Kyrie were, but in the finals, they just were a little outmatched by Boston's overall collection of greatness and talent on the roster. It was clear Dallas was just a man short. So this is where bringing someone like Malcolm Brogdon in, I do think makes some sense. He has 1 year left on his contract, $22.5 million. You would have to figure his next contract will be below that price point. So this isn't just necessarily a 1 year rental. This could be a player that Dallas looks at and says, hey, we'd like to keep him long term. Now the Blazers do take in a collection of players here, and this is probably the deal that would flat out win the bid for Malcolm Brogdon's services. You're giving up Tim Hardaway Jr. Obviously, his salary has to be included here. Someone who is not really in the rotation in the conference finals or the finals for the most part. Tim Hardaway Jr. is basically a salary dump here. Omax Prosper, though, he is one of the best chips in this trade for Portland. A very young team, a rebuilding team, looking for athleticism, players who can fit along the Scoot Henderson, Anthony Simons timeline. That's where Omax Prosper, I think, would make a ton of sense. Now, skill-wise, I don't think he makes Portland much better right now, but Portland, they have their eyes on picking toward the top in the 2025 draft with hopes of landing Cooper Flagg or Ace Bailey or Nolan Traore, another guard. We'll see what happens there with Portland. But Omax Prosper, I do think from a positional standpoint and an upside standpoint, makes a really good deal of sense for Portland to want to acquire. AJ Lawson's in here to help the money work. Like I just referenced, that would be a very real possibility. Here he is in this trade like that. And then a 2025 first-round pick unprotected as well. So I know some Mavs fans are going to say all of that for Malcolm Brogdon. First of all, Malcolm Brogdon's a good player who has helped teams win a lot of games throughout his career. I think he can be a very high-quality backup point guard. Think back to a couple of years ago when he won the Sixth Man of the Year trophy. He can be that type of bench guard, that bench scorer, bench ball handler, bench floor general for the Dallas Mavericks behind Luka Doncic and Kyrie Irving, giving them one more guy who can create off the dribble for himself, can create for others, run pick and rolls. This really stabilizes their second unit. And while, yes, they've relied on Jaden Hardy at times for that role, it's just a massive upgrade getting Malcolm Brogdon at this point in time. He's a better defender than Jaden Hardy. He's a more reliable offensive player than Jaden Hardy, both on and off the basketball. I just think it does make a good deal of sense for upgrading Dallas's backcourt, especially coming off the bench and their sixth-man unit, and surrounding Luka and Kyrie with one more ball handler, like I've talked about multiple times already. Yes, you're giving up a decent amount, but if you're the Mavericks, you just made a run to the finals, you have to figure your 2025 first-round pick's not going to be extremely valuable. You just drafted Omax Prosper in the 20s last year. Would you give up 2 picks in the 20s for someone like Malcolm Brogdon when you're in title contention? And I think Dallas could justify this internally. Now, it is a decent amount to give up. I do think this is, again, the deal that Portland would ultimately probably say yes to on the market. So maybe you can finagle, try and pull Omax Prosper out of the deal. I do think that 2025 first would definitely be in that, though. So this is kind of, again, a framework. Not saying that this is the exact deal that would actually get done, but I do think if Dallas offered this, Portland would probably happily accept, especially given the fact that Brogdon is heading toward unrestricted free agency in 12 months. Moving on to potential trade number 2, and this is probably the best player Dallas is going to be able to potentially acquire, and that is Deni Avdija of the Washington Wizards. And it comes with a pretty hefty price point here. You're giving up 2 unprotected first-round picks, and one of them is a long ways from now, that 2031 first-round pick, completely unprotected. And I talked about how if a team's going to trade for that, the GM and president of basketball operations in place are probably going to need some real long-term job security. Well, guess what? Michael Winger, Will Dawkins, overseeing the beginning of a rebuild right now in Washington. They both have long-term deals tying them to the Wizards for the foreseeable future. I think that tandem has a lot of job security, so I think they could be one of the front offices worth waiting for that 2031 first in the event that Luka Doncic asks out of Dallas at some point, or maybe some injury luck hurts Dallas down the road. That 2031 first could become extremely valuable for Washington, who by that point in time you would have to figure that they're probably nearing the really strong point of what they could become and what they could blossom into based on the fact that they're going to bottom out the next couple of years. They own the second pick in this draft. They're going to probably be in line for top 5 picks in the next 2 or 3 drafts as well. Washington's going to be loading up on talent. Deni Avdija, yes, you're sacrificing a really good player, a really young player who could fit your timeline, but you're getting a lot of high-end outcome possibility down the road in 2031. and you're giving yourself increased trade flexibility as well if you're Washington, where maybe you're in a few years a team vying for championship status or trying to make that push at least. You have that 2031 first to trade as well down the road, which would give Washington increased long-term trade flexibility. But for the Mavericks, you're getting a player here who can dribble, pass, and shoot. He can defend across multiple positions. I think he's one of the more underrated point-of-attack defenders in the NBA. He's very good in transition. Him and Corey Kispert really connect a lot there in Washington. I think one of the more underrated transition duos, honestly, in the NBA. I think Avdija, another player who, when he came out of Israel a few years ago when I was evaluating him as a draft prospect, I loved his upside as a primary pick-and-roll ball handler, something he hasn't gotten to do a ton of based on who's played around him there in Washington. And obviously, Dallas isn't going to afford him 25, 30 pick-and-rolls a game, but with an offense very heavily built on horns action, high pick-and-roll, spreading the floor, someone like Avdija who can knock down open jump shots, attack closeouts well, and handle in the pick and roll is a pretty seamless fit into the way that Dallas plays. And giving them another guy who can be a quality point of attack defender. He's got good positional size, really good athlete. If you're asking me, is this worth 2 first-round picks for Dallas? I do unequivocally say yes, it is. I think from an age standpoint, a long-term contract standpoint, he's on a descending contract. This gives Dallas a lot of long-term flexibility. Yes, you're trading out the final draft assets you have to trade, but you're getting a very good young player who is already extended. I think this is a home run here for Dallas if they're able to pull it off. And for Washington, I think, again, that long-term upside of that 2031 first might be enough to move the needle here in a potential deal. Again, maybe this is a deal where you need to see Omax Prosper included. Maybe this is a deal where Jaden Hardy could make some sense being included. There are some details you'd have to work out here yet, of course, for Washington, but I think this is a really strong framework to start here. Now for potential trade number 3, this is another one that I know Mavs fans would be very excited about, and it's a pretty linear trade, honestly. You're trading 1-for-1, and you're trading next year's first-round pick for the services of Bogdanovic, who I think is a better cutter than Tim Hardaway Jr. I think he works the baseline a little bit smoother, a little bit better, and I think he's just a better playmaker as well. So you're kind of losing some of Tim Hardaway Jr.'s overall, hey, I'm going to shoot this super deep 3 in transition, which at times is super annoying to watch anyway. And what you're turning that into, yes, at the cost of a first-round pick, you're turning into a player who has some real connective tissue to his player DNA. He's able to function as another playmaker, another creator, not only for himself, but for others as a driver and as a slasher, cutter. I think that there's things in Bogdanovic's game, a little bit more nuance, a little bit more patience, a little bit more playmaking vision that he's going to be able to maximize the other surrounding pieces in Dallas. I think, again, if you're looking for a third ball handler, third playmaker, that's been kind of the main theme so far in this video, looking for more perimeter talent, perimeter creation talent specifically. Someone like Bogdanovic is a very significant upgrade over Tim Hardaway Jr. Now for Atlanta, I do think this does make some sense. You're trading Bogdanovic, who is by far the better player in this deal, but what you are getting is long-term salary cap relief, which doesn't sound super sexy. But remember, 12 months ago, the Hawks traded John Collins away for basically a bag of Doritos because they're trying to clear up some cap space because they're really up against the wall, especially after earning the first overall pick. They're hovering around the aprons, and they're not a very good team. So the Hawks are probably in line to clear up some salary. This gives them some long-term future cap relief, getting off of Bogdanovic's 3-year contract while still picking up value with that 2025 first-round pick, and you have an expiring in Tim Hardaway Jr. that you could maybe reroute somewhere very easily as well. So very valuable deal here, in my opinion, for Atlanta. You turn Bogdanovic into a first-round pick. You get an expiring contract in the process that you could either dump somewhere else or just hold on to and let expire. I think this does make sense for Atlanta and their cap table, most specifically long-term. While for Dallas, it is a significant upgrade into their rotation. You go from having a guy who wasn't playing serious playoff minutes by the end of your run to probably your 3rd or 4th best player on the roster, depending on Derek Lively's development going into next year. My guess is Lively will be the 3rd best player on the Mavs next year, but Bogdanovic would be their 3rd creator offensively in their half-court offense. Potential trade number 4, and this one is with the Golden State Warriors, and the Mavericks have been enamored with Andrew Wiggins over the last couple of years. Think back to their run to the Western Conference Finals in 2022. Andrew Wiggins had arguably one of his best couple weeks of his NBA career in that series. He really impacted Dallas's offense with his point of attack defensive skills. Really did a good job limiting and covering Luka Doncic one-on-one and navigating screens, and obviously threw down kind of that earthquake poster dunk over Luka as well in that series. And I think since then, Dallas has had their eyes on Wiggins as a potential trade target and trade candidate for them. Now, he hasn't been easily available. Now I think is the time where Golden State, with the new CBA looming over them, would they be willing to dump Wiggins to try and kind of reset their cap table a little bit, get some cheaper contracts on the book with some long-term stability, long-term contracts there in the books? They're getting off a Wiggins 3-year deal, but they're able to stretch him into 2 rotation players instead of just 1, getting Josh Green, who I think for Golden State, if you look at the way that they play, Green already triggers into dribble handoffs a decent amount for Dallas. That would fit a lot better in Golden State next to Steph Curry and Klay Thompson. And the way that they look to play, I think Green would be a smoother, easier fit. Obviously still extremely young, I think could help bridge Golden State past their current era of basketball as well long term. And he comes at a significantly cheaper price point than Andrew Wiggins. Maxi Kleber could be a nice install piece into the way that they currently play. You think about the success Dario Saric had at times this year. Maxi Kleber is just a far better player than Dario Saric because of what he can do defensively. I think a front court of Kleber and Draymond Green would be really unique and dynamic because Kleber's shooting can keep him on the floor next to Draymond. And Draymond and Kleber could really function as a 4-5 combo in today's NBA, I think, with their spacing, their pace, and the way that they're both able to move their feet laterally. They would be a really strong defensive pairing. And the Warriors get a first-round pick here. Again, that pick does not project to be extremely great. But for Dallas, again, yes, you're giving up some decent pieces here. The reason you do this deal is because Andrew Wiggins is far better than Josh Green or Maxi Kleber individually on the offensive side of the floor as a go-to scoring option, a go-to creating option. Now, I'm not suggesting that he's going to be a 20-point-per-game guy for Dallas, but what I am saying is you can punish mismatches with him by feeding him in the post. He's a more dynamic shot creator off the bounce than either Green or Kleber. Obviously, he is an uber athletic wing, can finish above the rim. I think he and Doncic would have really good synergy, like we've seen from PJ Washington, Derrick Jones Jr., Daniel Gafford, Derek Lively on lob attempts. I think Wiggins would fit into the team culture, team identity that way. And the reality is Wiggins 2 years ago was playing his best basketball of his career. Now, the last couple of years he's been dealing with off the court stuff and a lot of situations that have really kind of dampened his reputation as of late. I do think that if you get Wiggins into another new situation, I think he'll be uplifted, just like how he was getting traded from Minnesota to Golden State. Maybe another change of scenery could be exactly what Andrew Wiggins needs. Now, I try to stay away from that type of analysis. That's kind of more speculative than anything. But if you're Dallas and trying to look at this optimistically, maybe Andrew Wiggins could be that missing half-court offensive piece that just gives you a little bit more on-ball creation, a little bit more bounce, and point of attack defensively. When Wiggins is locked in and on his game and in the best shape of his life, he could be arguably one of the better point of attack defenders because he has a ton of recovery skills. He does a good job staying attached to ball handlers. Obviously, he's not Maple Jordan. His career didn't play out that way, but for this price point, for where Dallas is looking to go, I do think it could make some sense. This is maybe a little rich from Dallas's perspective, but it's important to note here, you can't include Tim Hardaway Jr. in this deal and Maxi Kleber because Golden State, since they're in the second apron, they cannot trade 2 players out in a deal, so they can't aggregate salaries together to match. That's one of the big difficulties here for them. And the other thing is they have to send out more salary than they can take in, so they can't just take in Kleber and Tim Hardaway Jr. So some of those new CBA rules are coming into play here on a potential deal between Dallas and Golden State. Now, potential trade number 5, and I think Mavs fans would be very happy to see this one. This is a good reunion, feel-good story here for Dallas. They bring back Dorian Finney-Smith, who they traded last year for Kyrie Irving. Dorian Finney-Smith comes back to the Mavericks now, and the cost is 1 first-round pick, that 2025 first-rounder, and Tim Hardaway Jr. As of late, Nets owner Joe Tsai has been talking about trying to find stability and long-term success, long-term winning for the Brooklyn Nets, and I think with that in mind, maybe they're turning their eyes to acquiring some draft picks. Obviously, the rumors and reports are still that they're trying to build around Mikal Bridges. That could be the case, but stockpiling draft picks might be part of Brooklyn's long-term plan to build out that sustained winning model that he's been talking about. So you get Tim Hardaway Jr., who, if you want to argue on a half-court offensive talent basis, Tim Hardaway Jr. is the better half-court offensive player than Dorian Finney-Smith. For Brooklyn, a team that doesn't have a lot of offensive creation right now, yes, they have Dennis Schroeder, they have Cam Thomas, Mikal Bridges, maybe getting one more shooter in there. This is a landing spot where maybe Tim Hardaway Jr. could actually have some benefit. He's more than just maybe a salary dump in this, but that 2025 first, again, is really the main chip here in this deal. Again, maybe you could argue that a young player has to be in here like a Jaden Hardy or an Omax Prosper. You could have your pick here on who has to be included in that, but Dorian Finney-Smith would be a significant upgrade in return for Dallas. We already know he's a fantastic corner shooter, someone who has been phenomenal next to Luka Doncic in past iterations of these Mavericks teams. He's a tremendous player and a tremendous point of attack defender. I think one thing has been really missed with the way that Dallas has defended this postseason. They defended by running guys off the three-point line. They defended by closing out very, very hard, and as a result, they got blown by a ton. I think going into next year, the way that the Mavericks defended this postseason and the end of the regular season is not super sustainable. I think with teams having the scouting report, they're going to start to pick some of those matchups apart, especially with where Dallas was aligning their weak side defenders, oftentimes down the middle of the paint. I think teams with better scouting reports and having a full year of film now, or almost a full year, right, a half year of film on Dallas going into next season, I think if they try to stick with that model defensively, they're going to really struggle next year. So getting a really elite point of attack defender, someone who, yes, he doesn't put up all the counting stats, he doesn't get the steals and blocks, but he's one of those keep ball in front kind of guys who sits down and guards. He does a great job limiting the other team's best player and making life difficult on him. I think Dorian Finney-Smith, a reunion with Dallas makes a ton of sense. The Brooklyn Nets get draft capital here. They get a player who could maybe even play some minutes for them. And the Mavericks get a player who could be a real premium fit back into the rotation for Dallas, and giving Jason Kidd that go-to number one defender. I know Dallas was very bummed to have traded Dorian Finney-Smith to begin with. They get him back. I think everyone's happy here in this potential trade. So let's look at some other options quick. I don't have real frameworks here for these two, but I wanted to talk about some potential three-team trades that I could see making some sense. A three-team deal with Milwaukee where Team X would be involved. I don't know what team that would be, but the contracts of Bobby Portis and Pat Connaughton are really what Milwaukee has to play with. Now, again, they can't aggregate salaries to make a deal happen, so it could be one of either of them, right? So would Dallas have interest in Pat Connaughton? I think that would make some sense. He's extremely athletic, can really shoot the ball. Bobby Portis could also make some sense as a backup four-man. Now, with the PJ Washington addition, I think Portis is far less likely, but maybe they could jump into a deal with Milwaukee to help facilitate something. If Milwaukee's trying to go get somebody, Dallas could be a natural third option in a deal to help kind of figure out salaries if a team is trying to sell and get some second-round picks from Milwaukee, for example, and if the Bucks have to send out some salary, Pat Connaughton could be a really tremendous option for Dallas to jump in and try and snag in that kind of situation. Another three-team deal construction that I liked that I wanted to talk about, but I didn't have a great framework for, was something with Sacramento and Washington collectively. Obviously, we've seen the Mavs work with Washington already, part of the Daniel Gafford trade, and essentially that was a three-team deal where they had to work with OKC as well. In this iteration, Kuzma, who declined to go to Dallas, saying they weren't contenders, would end up in Sacramento, funny enough. Dallas would send some of their money to Washington, so like their Tim Hardaway Jr. contract and maybe a little bit more, maybe a few second-round picks as well, and maybe one of those young guys like Omax Prosper, like a Jaden Hardy, they would be involved in this deal. And then one of Harrison Barnes or Kevin Huerter to Dallas. Now, if it's Harrison Barnes, maybe it's just a second-round pick or two in Tim Hardaway Jr.'s contract, right? But if it's Kevin Huerter, someone who has more functional value for Dallas as a real shooter, a real sniper, he could make a ton of sense for the Mavericks to acquire as a bench laser. So Kevin Huerter didn't shoot the ball extremely well this past year, but he is still a threat every time he walks out onto the court. I think he could give Dallas some real flexible offensive go-to options, like as a go screener, as a Spain screener, some things that Dallas already does. I think he could enhance a lot of their sets. So I think he could make a ton of sense for them, especially Huerter. Now Barnes, maybe he's size, he's a veteran, whatever, but I'm not moved by a Harrison Barnes reunion in Dallas, but I am moved by a Kevin Huerter move to Dallas, where if Dallas doesn't have to give up a ton out of their rotation and they use Tim Hardaway Jr.'s contract to get to that Huerter number, that could make a really good deal of sense as well. As Washington continues to rebuild, Sacramento looks to add talent, and Dallas tries to take advantage of Washington probably not wanting Kevin Huerter in that trade. I really hope you guys did enjoy. Thank you all so much for watching. Really do appreciate each and every one of you so much. If you did enjoy, leave a like, subscribe to the channel for more content. Mavs fans, let me know down below, what trade targets did I miss? Is there anyone I didn't talk about that you would have wanted me to? Someone that came to mind for me was Jonathan Isaac of the Orlando Magic. I'm just not sure if Orlando is going to be willing to give him up though. So let me know down in the comment section below, and we'll catch you guys in the very next Utility Sports video.